Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the origin presentation for Australia. Well, we'll go through the agenda first and what we should be covering. And like everyone would know, Australia is a large producer and exporter. The domestic consumption is hardly anything, so most of the production of pulses is all exported out, mainly to the Indian subcontinent. We'll be talking about production trends and grower intentions in the coming years, in the coming season. We'll also be talking about market dynamics, price movements, wherever we can, but one of the important things also that we'll try and cover is the weather issues, because there would be a number of you who would know that over the past 2 years, Australia has been through tremendous drought, and the drought-like conditions are barely about getting over now. Over the past 10 days or so, we've seen torrential rain actually in New South Wales and Queensland. So the rains have been widespread. It's all a good sign, but the actual planting of the winter crop, which is the main crop in Australia, is in June, July. So we are hoping that the moisture is actually retained within the soil, because we are entering into winter. So the chance of evaporation of moisture is less at the moment. So the more rain that we can get after this, the better. We do have a summer crop that comes up just before the winter crop, but that's only localized in very few areas in New South Wales, where sorghum and corn and sunflower and all its producers, and the mung beans for the pulses. So, but majorly, we are now looking forward to the 2020 production, which is in November, December. Well, the other thing also importantly that I wanted to touch upon is the Australian outlook towards how it places itself towards the Indian pulses scenario, the markets in the Indian subcontinent. It treats itself as a complement or complementary supplier to India. As you would know, that one of the major production crops and pulses is desi chickpeas, and desi chickpeas is India is a large producer of and consumer of desi chickpeas. So it is an important supplier, Australia is to India. We also talk about Australia having its winter crop in November, December, which is almost at the fag end of the Indian crop, because India harvests in March, April or so, and the supplies towards the end of the season for India can be managed by Australia on the desi chickpeas. So India, it sees itself for food security, food safety, capacity buildings, and also standard setting. So Australia is happy to partner in any of those areas. The Australian main crops that we'll be talking about is desi chickpeas, Kabuli chickpeas, fava beans, dun peas, and lentils. Dun peas, lentils, and lupins. We go to desi chickpeas first. I've drawn up some sort of over the past 5 years, only to give you an idea of the variation, or in other terms, as to the potential that Australia could be as a supplier of desi chickpeas to India. So Australia has a potential to produce over 2 million tons, which it has done in 2016-17, but it was actually driven by the demand that came in from the Indian subcontinent. And Australia actually sees itself as if it's been able to step up to meet the requirements of India. So we've heard earlier today, Saurabh and Mr. Chandrasekhar and all talk about, all right, production in India is going up, but we need to increase the consumption. So I fully endorse that. You know, like the production is on the rise, but the consumption also needs to go up. And worldwide, in case of the consumption of pulses goes up, Australia actually sees itself as one of the suppliers to meet that demand of consumption. Well, on the other hand, you know, from over 2 million ton crop, we've had some very dismal figures over the past 2 years, And you could see that over 300,000 hectares actually just produced 280,000 tons in 18-19, and this year, which is just year gone by in 19-20, was another dismal year. And that 269,000 tons production is actually the ABARES figures, which I would say as being on the trade side, I think it's a little optimistic. So we kind of put the figure more like 220,000 tons of chickpeas. Where we think that the chickpeas could really step up even further is the Volgut region. If any of you all are familiar, it's a huge potential producer of daisy chickpeas. Over the past not only 2 years of the drought, but even before that, unfortunately, Volgut area in New South Wales has been lagging behind in terms of receiving good rainfall to produce the chickpeas. So in case if the rain actually comes about, which over the past 10 days it has, so we do see the coming season to be shaping fairly well, because over the past 2 years there's been fallow land and with these upcoming rains, there is a good potential. But the whole question again comes about, all right, okay, in case if we produce those chickpeas, where do we place them? Because Bangladesh, Pakistan, UAE are there are certain limitations on what can go over there, but we really look forward to maybe in the longer term, because it's very difficult to do it in the short supply, but the consumption of India increasing, and of course the policies of trade that open up. Well, we think that chickpeas is barely anything left, 60,000 tons, but a fair amount of that is committed towards the end of the season. We'll come to some estimated stocks of a slide. We'll come to that, where we'll see that there's almost negligible that'll carry forward to the next season. This is a very quick graph that I just wanted to show. It just visually kind of shows the huge variation in the area planted, which is the red line, and the production. So in 1 year, you could have 2 tons to the hectare, and this is on an average. But on the other hand, you could have as less as half a ton to the hectare. So a lot depends on the weather, and therefore it is fairly important for desi chickpeas, or for that matter any pulse crop in Australia, to just follow the weather conditions as the crop goes about, because it could change drastically over time. Well, we come to Kabuli chickpeas. Kabuli chickpeas is a very small crop in Australia, but and it's been very small last year only because of the drought in New South Wales and part of Victoria. I'm just touching upon fava beans and broad beans. It may not be relevant for the Indian subcontinent or India, but Australia is a large producer of fava beans and broad beans, so that goes mostly to the markets of Egypt and the Middle East. We come to dun peas. Dun peas again is a fairly consistent kind of a production quantity, because the areas planted is more or less drawn out over Western Australia, South Australia and Victoria, and because it's spread over such a large geographical region, so the consistency in the production comes about, unlike the chickpeas, which is actually just concentrated on New South Wales and Queensland. So like we've seen over the past 2 years, when there's been a drought, it almost wipes out the whole crop. Well, lentils is something again which is concentrated within Victoria and South Australia. It's had a fairly decent run, but you'll see in lentils also that the potential of production is huge. In 2016-17, again, Australia stepped up to the requirement of the demand from the Indian subcontinent, in India particular, and we produced about 1 million tons of lentils, and this is all red lentils. So we're talking about some stocks, but we will come to a slide later on. But we think that we went into this new crop with about 43,000 tons. We produced about 375,000 tons. We think that by the end of October 2020, all of it will get exported, but That's a fair way to go, so we'll see how it goes depending on the demand. And then ultimately we'll be left over with minus the seed, minus the wastage, minus the domestic demand and all, barely 15,000 tons or so. Lupins is another thing that I just wanted to touch upon because it's a high protein pulse, and India is a large producer. In fact, the production of it has actually come down over the years. I remember 15 years ago or 20 years ago, there used to be almost a 2 million ton crop because there used to be a certain amount of demand, whether it was from Europe or China. But it's mostly used as feed. There is the albus lupins, which goes for human consumption into the Middle East, but apart from this, the angustifolia lupins is more or less for animal feed. Well, we just come to the estimated stocks, and these are just as an estimate, and they're my personal estimations. So we think that desi chickpeas is hardly anything about even now, leave alone what will be left over by the new crop coming up. Lentils also depends. I've assumed that there'll be at least about certain up to March, about 40,000 tons a month. After that, 25,000 tons a month export. So we'll be left with nothing. That whatever has been produced will be exported out. So there's not going to be anything much. But again, drawing your attention towards the lupins, which India doesn't buy, but there is a huge amount of carry forward stocks which just remain almost every year. Well, I'd just like to touch upon the desi chickpeas in particular once again, and it's only because for Australia, desi chickpeas is the largest pulse product. Out of it'll almost be like in a year where there was 2 million tons of desi chickpeas produced. There was a total of just about 4 million tons of pulses, so it's almost 50% of the total crop in the pulse crop in Australia. And it is fairly important for the Indian market as well, because the Indian market looks towards fulfilling any kind of a gap in demand from Australia. So again, touching upon the production and intentions of desi chickpeas, it takes a cue from the demand that comes over from India. We at Pulse Australia, we signed a memorandum of understanding with IGPA about a couple of years ago. In fact, it was at the last IGPA conference in 2018 with some open kind of information. And we are now talking to maybe even NAFED, Mr. Sunil Singh is here, that if Pulse Australia could have some sort of an information MOU, and it only helps the Australian growers to look towards its planting intentions, because in India, the harvest of desi chickpeas would come about in March and April, and the planting in Australia would be May and June or July. It could be as long as July. So there is a little bit of time where, in case if India is actually falling short, then and if Australia needs to step up, there has to be a certain amount of methodology of communication where it could get down to the Australian farmer, and I think it's going to be a win-win situation for both Australia and India. Well, Bangladesh and Pakistan remain the main buyers as of now, but that we hope over time that we would continue to supply to India as well. Central Queensland this year, it was, and I've just pointed this out only because it has been fairly skewed. While the whole drought area in New South Wales and southern Queensland was so bad that there were chickpea crops and the whole paddocks which were just left unharvested because the yields were so low, 0.1 ton, 0.2 tons to the hectare. So the growers didn't even bother to harvest the chickpeas. They just said that it's not even worth the cost of harvesting the chickpeas. So this year, Central Queensland produced almost about 75% of the total Australian crop. So with that, I think I've covered a little bit of the Australian pulses, or most of it, and in case if there are any questions, happy to take any questions in case if anyone has anything.